as tempting as it might be to accept the Maharal's explanation as to why Rashi appears to reject a literal Shuta Shal Mikra reading of the Lifnei Iver, the Rebbe finds this explanation somewhat problematic. The basis, according to the Maharal, was the inclusion of the 4 words following this prohibition of Vayareta me'elokecha ani Hashem. The Rebbe argued that when one analyzes a almost identical commentary that Rashi provides to Vayikra 19:32, the Maharal's reasoning then becomes somewhat problematic. In that pasuk we have 2 mitzvot aseh. The first, mipnei seva takum. A seva is an elderly person. The Torah demands that one show respect to the elderly by stopping what one is doing and standing as they enter the room. The topic of the second mitzvah aseh in this pasuk is a zakein, and so as not to duplicate the mipnei seva takum, the interpretation of a zakein, which although is synonymous with a seva, is here understood as one who is more knowledgeable than oneself, and not necessarily one who is elderly. The command is Vahadarta Panei Zakein. You are required to honor the presence of a sage. The commonality between Vayikra 19:14 and Vayikra 19:32 is that both pasukim conclude with the 4 words Vayareta me'elokecha ani Hashem. In his commentary to Vayikra 19:32, and under the heading of Vahadarta Panei Zakein, the first part of Rashi quantifies the obligation of Vahadarta, providing us with 3 examples. 1, lo yeshe b'mkomo, one should not sit in a seat that is normally allocated to the zakein. V'lo yedaber b'mkomo, one should not usurp the authority of the zakein by speaking out of turn. When one is expecting a response from the zakein, one feels he or she might have the right to interject. And thirdly, v'lo yistor et dvarav, one should not publicly at least contradict the words, the opinion of that zakein. In the second half of the commentary, Rashi defines and justifies the inclusion of the requirement that one must fear your God, Ani Hashem. Similar to the definition for the Vayareta me'elokech of Vayikra 19:14, Rashi, in his commentary to this pasuk, writes, V'chol davar hamasur lelev, any aspect of the human experience that is literally handed over to the heart, in other words, that remain internal, not expressed publicly, to these kinds of obligations, both positive and negative, the Torah appends the statement that Vayareta me'elokecha, you are to fear God. God does have the ability of reading the thoughts of man, and hence Ani Hashem, code for I will hold man accountable, where there is the intent, however camouflaged, that leads to a violation of Torah law. This definition comes on the heels of a justification for the inclusion of the V'yareta me'elokech as part of V'hadarta Panei Zakein, the obligation to show due respect to a sage. Quoting from the Torah Kahanim, Rashi asks rhetorically that Yachol, it is possible for a person to delude him or herself, neglect to show due respect to the Zakein, claiming that Ya'atzim Einav, metaphorically shutting his eyes tight, Kamisha lo ra'ahu, as if he was not aware of the fact that the Zakein was in the room, and hence he would plead that he could not be held accountable for violating V'hadarta Panei Zakein. This, of course, would be a false rationalization for which the individual hoped to be not held accountable for showing disrespect to a Talmid Chacham. L'kach ne'emar v'yareta me'elokecha. And in response to this situation, the Torah adds the statement of v'yareta me'elokecha. And the reason that it does so here is because shahari davar zeh masur lelibo shel Osehu. The actions of the individual are not that clear-cut. They are ambiguous. Was this an honest oversight, or was this a clear attempt on the part of the individual to demonstrate a distaste for the Zakein? And nobody can be sure what the motivation was. She'ein makir bo elahu, because it was only he or she, the individual, that was privy to the circumstance for a perceived violation of V'hadarta Panei Zakein. Clearly, this commentary of Rashi parallels the commentary that Rashi has made to the V'yareita Me'Elokeh of Vayikra 19:14, with one core difference. That difference lies in the fact that the justification component comes under the heading of V'hadarta Pnei Zaken, suggesting that its role is to amplify a particular aspect of the obligation. In this case, that the individual should be wary about pleading honest mistake when in effect the intent was to show disrespect. In contrast, an almost parallel commentary to the words V'yareita Me'Elokecha of Vayikra 19:14 comes under its own heading. In other words, it is a standalone commentary, one that does not necessarily come to amplify or forewarn the command of V'lifnei Iver lo titein mikshol. For, were this the case, Rashi should have, as he does in his commentary to V'hadarta Pnei Zaken, merely continued the commentary and explanation of V'yareita Me'Elokecha without placing it under a separate heading. The fact that there is a separate heading, argues the Rebbe, indicates that the commentary that he has for V'yareita Me'Elokecha is not linked into V'lifnei Iver, which brings us back to the original question: why is it that Rashi ignores the Pshuta Shel Mikra understanding of Lifnei Iver in favor of the Suma B'davar, one who's blind to circumstances that could be detrimental to his or her well-being?